Today is entitled Processing Peace. Would you open to Philippians chapter 4? In the movies, there's always feedback at this moment. And the person says, can you hear me? It's like a Hollywood tradition. If you watch a movie, they're in a gymnasium, the microphone's there. Oh, Daniel, I turned it off. Here we go. I want you to be watching for that, and then think of me. I'm the one to tip you off. Kathy always looks over at me. Oops. Push the button, yes. Here we go. Let's you know what? I'm getting a red light. That's what's happening here. So I'm going to use John's magic microphone. Okay, today is entitled Processing Peace. As my second class in Greek for Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary, we had to go through and translate an entire book of the Bible. For Greek, we did Philippians. And I had a professor, Dr. Harrop. They called him Shotgun Harrop because he put the class on the spot. And you had to do your homework, and you had to be ready to stand up and read in the Greek and share what your interpretation of the words was. And he knew if you were cheating, as everybody kind of had to cheat a little bit. You couldn't just not use any helps at all, but that's okay because nobody becomes a Greek or Hebrew expert by getting a master's at a seminary. There are people who devote their entire lives to studying the Greek and Hebrew text. But what seminary does for our students who will go, they learn how to use the tools so that if somebody's on television or somebody stands up with their study Bible, they know whether they're making any sense or not, if they have anything to build their argument on. Which I think is kind of funny because why should we be arguing in the church anyway? Why should we have argument over some little jot and tittle? With the church in history, Christians persecuted Christians over interpretations and over little words and even vowels in the Greek text. That's why this chapter 4 takes us to a process involved when there's a disagreement in the church. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. We were just in chapter 3 last week. And so you would know what therefore is therefore, right? Because you had a whole sermon and a sermon before that, and maybe another one before that. Plus, you've already read Philippians a number of times. So we should know why he said therefore. I think he was talking about running the race. I think he said, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward. Then that chapter kind of ends with dealing with our lowly bodies. Will one day be transformed like his glorious body. And so I got down on my knees last week and I said, old folks, I'm going to include myself because I'm getting older, because I notice stuff like this. I got to take my glasses on, take them on and off just to see. And sometimes in a crowded restaurant, I have a hard time. I used to be able to listen to 2 or 3 conversations at the same time. Now I just wish some of the people would shut up so I could just hear the person that's looking right at me. Thanks, Kurt. Now you can turn this one off. Can you hear me? Just give us a little feedback for effect. All right. We'll put the feedback in post-production. He's talking about running the race, but I said, if you've been running the race for many decades, as I have now, I have been a Christian longer than half of my entire life lived. And I've been running. I haven't had 2 or 3 years where I got mad at sister so-and-so or brother by and by, and I just dropped out. I haven't had that. Oh, they've got mad at me. I don't know what the deal is. I think it's maybe because I grew up in a family with a bunch of kids, and we didn't hold grudges against each other. If you have a fight, but get over it. That's the person you're going to play with later. That's the person you're going to share life with. Paul knows there's a problem in the church, but like our dear sister Ruth Price, she'd write me a letter about a problem in the church, and first she'd butter me up real good. She'd talk about, what a good preacher I was, and how gifted I am, and how she loves our church, and then boom, she'd let me have it. Next paragraph. But it wasn't unique to her. I knew she was a student of the Apostle Paul. I just knew it because of the way she would write her letters to us. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, maybe your version just says my brothers. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown. Oh, you're so dear to me. Stand firm, a military term. Stand firm. See, in that last chapter, we're using the athletic term. Running the race. We're running to win the prize. And the crown that you would win at one of those races, a laurel crown for the winner. If I connect that together, you are one of the reasons Paul was running the race. And those dear sisters, Lydia in Philippi. I don't know if she's still there, but that's where Paul met her. And there were some other sisters at the prayer meeting. Probably not a huge turnout to the prayer meeting at the riverside, but Paul found the sisters there, Lydia and some other sisters. Maybe he had the other sisters in mind as he says, you are my joy, and in part, you're the reason I run this race. Otherwise, God would have taken me home. I would have crossed the finish line. There were a lot of good opportunities to cross the finish line on the missionary trips. I got stoned and left for dead. Good time I could have crossed the finish line right then, just like Stephen before me. Oh, I would have been a good time to just look up and say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Into your hands I commend my spirit. That would have been a good time. But the Lord chose to keep Paul, and he said, if I remain in this body, it's because there's fruitful labor for me. If I remain in this body, it's for your sake. You're my joy and my crown. So people of God, brothers and, yes, sisters, Lydia, Euodia, Syntyche, sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm. Military term. In this way, dear friends. What way? I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. When I first read this, I just read over it. I didn't think it was any big deal, actually, until I took the Greek class. And everybody makes a big deal of this. There is a disagreement. It's like, what's the big deal, professor? What's the big deal, Greek scholar? What's the big deal, Paul? Haven't you ever been in a local church? There's always somebody who is not in agreement with somebody. Maybe you're scratching your head today going, oh, no, as far as I know, everybody's agreeing on everything. As far as I know. Yeah? Well, have you asked Patrice her opinion? Patrice? Yeah, we've got a lady in our church named Patrice, and she has 101 opinions. And it's good. You'll never run out of stuff to talk about if you ask her, hey, what's your take on this? She's got lots to say, lots to quote. She's well read. Good conversationalist. She's not disagreeable in her opinions, however. But in this case, Paul says, I plead. Now, this is not just a gentle term. It's, I'm on my knees begging. Euodia, Syntyche, be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, you, my loyal yoke fellow, you, my true companion, I ask you to help these women. since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel. All you have to do is just visit some people you used to go to church with, ask them how church is going. If you know some people in common, hey, how's sister so-and-so and brother by and by? How are they doing? Well, Christians aren't supposed to gossip, so I don't really know what to say. But this can't go any further. There's something going on here. And Paul calls on the loyal yoke fellow, whoever that is, his true companion, to help these women who have in the past contended with him by his side for the sake of the gospel. And that is what happens when we ask, hey, how is brother by and by getting by? And how is sister so-and-so? And it's so difficult when you hear they've been involved in a conflict that has brought dysfunction to the local fellowship. Golly, just a couple sentences ago, Paul is talking about crossing the finish line and being transformed like his glorious body. That's heaven stuff. But then he gets down right here where we live. Women's stuff. These ladies contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. I don't think we ever got a name for the Philippian jailer, did we? Or his wife, his sons or daughters, his servants, the household. You know, all of them were radically changed in that household. At that spontaneous meeting when Paul and Silas had been jailed after having been stripped and whipped. They'd been jailed, and what were they doing around midnight? Will you guys shut up? Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how... Hey! Will you guys keep it down in there? We're trying to sleep. It's midnight. I think it's wonderful that Paul and Silas in jail, after having been stripped, whipped, beaten, thrown in jail, I think it's wonderful that they had songs stored up in their hearts and that they chose to sing songs, and that the Bible tells us that around midnight they were singing hymns to the Lord. So they probably weren't singing, oh, how he loves us. They're probably doing, there's power in the blood, and what are some other good old ones? In the garden, right?
Rugged cross.
So I decided to reconfigure the spelling of disagreement. I think this looks better. Goes along with dysfunction. I mean, if you put a D-Y-S in front of your label, you know, he's a dispastor. Unhealthy, fragmented, something wrong, something sick. Disagreement. Paul says, help these women agree in the Lord. But when you're faced with disagreement, oh, you can stay up on top of the slippery slope, but not normally. Normally, you're going to go to one extreme or the other. Normally, you're going to fall off that area of negotiation, mediation, arbitration, overlooking offenses, accountability, reconciliation. You're going to fall off that if you're not purposeful. You're going to fall one side or the other. Fight or flight. So we have a tool, the peacemaking tool. And our church has purposed to break a dysfunctional pattern that had developed in this local church. And I think is pervasive in the entire foothills region. So we've just drawn a line in the sand and said we are going to be a peacemaking church. Just like my wife and I have said, we are going to stay married. We are. As mean as she gets to me sometimes. I mean, you know, any guys out there live with a woman? You know, they are disagreeable sometimes. I mean, we're just minding our own business. Then they got some conflict. But the peacemaking model says, regardless of the relationship, whether it's wife, husband, brother, sister, neighbors over the fence, church, whether it's civil, political, spiritual, the principles stay the same. I'd rather fight than switch. I remember that old commercial. I forget what it was for. What was it? Lucky Strike, Wolfgang the deacon. He knows all about it. So there are some ways to keep from faking peace. That's flight. Remember, I'm just not going to say anything. Oh, golly, I heard about this once. Actually, I lived it. There was a bass player who was playing kind of busy. Like I was this morning, you know, all this stuff, kind of busy for a bass player. And so I looked over at him when I wasn't playing bass. I was playing guitar. I looked over him and I said, hey, can you just kind of keep it kind of simple? Because he had just learned all these runs, all this runs and stuff. I said, can you just kind of keep it kind of simple? A couple weeks later, he said, have you noticed I haven't played any runs? Now, that's a form of flight. But at least he spoke up. I think maybe he kind of wanted to play some runs again. He was kind of tired of pouting in the corner. But because an authority figure asked him to just calm it down a little bit and be a little more basic, like a good bass player ought to play, just because somebody tried to offer a little correction or a little guidance, he decided to pout. It's a form of denial. It's a form of flight. And the very extreme of that falling off the slippery slope on that side is suicide, when somebody withdraws. I'm glad the bass player said, yeah, I haven't been playing lately. I said, well, I didn't mean that. I just meant in that one song. Just that one song. No, I like what you're doing. You're doing a good job, you know. That's allowed me to kind of build them up a little bit, because sometimes, you know, some of us are very tender-hearted. Who are the sensitive people in your family? Are some more sensitive than others? A couple personalities a bit fragile. Well, you know, if we would grow to love one another, we wouldn't make fun of them so much. Yeah, you're being a baby. That's kind of the way I am. I kind of poke too much fun sometimes. And because I look at the world the way I would, if somebody poked fun at me, I wouldn't get all hurt about it and go whining and crying about it. See my attitude? See it right here? See it? Walking off. And you know, you just go, well, maybe I would give the person a little benefit of the faith. Maybe she woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day. Maybe she's got a little headache. Maybe they're hungry, a little angry over something else, delivering the mail to the wrong address. And the other extreme, fight, assault. Sometimes it's verbal. Litigation. By the time you get to litigation, you've fallen way off that side. And then the extreme of peace breaking is murder. Okay, well, don't want to read about any murders at Bell Road Baptist Church, and don't want to read about any suicides in Bell Road Baptist Church. Let's try to work on staying off the extremes and sticking up here with overlooking an offense and having somebody help us in our negotiations, maybe arbitrate for us or even mediate for us. That's where you have a third party that you trust and say, will you just listen to our case? Listen to the issue, and we both trust you. We know you love both of us or all of us equally. If you tell us what you think we should do, we'll agree in advance to do what you say. How wonderful to do that voluntarily in the local church rather than before some judge somewhere. Once we do negotiate and reconcile, we need some form of accountability. I'm going to tell on this situation with you and me, John. When John and I first met, he was kind of a punk. Maybe I would say he was strong-willed. That might be. But he kind of smart aleck and a know-it-all and always had to argue every single thing you brought up, had to argue with it. And it didn't rub me the wrong way. It just stroked my flesh. Because I know how to do that. And so he and I started sparring verbally and playfully. But I never ended up feeling like, hey, yeah, that was fun. That was edifying. That was uplifting. You know what it does? It stirs up our pride. And if you're the winner, you become more prideful. If you're the loser, you might become hurt or angry. So John and I, within a year of our association with each other, we called a truce. Now, he didn't have it with anybody else. I watched him just carry on like normal with others. But between him and me, when we'd started, I'd go, hey, remember the truce? And I think that was a good thing. And Kathy and I have called truces in our marriage before. That's a good thing. Armistice Day. Is there anybody who has any idea what Armistice Day was? And were you around to celebrate Armistice Day? Anybody? Who? I was going to call on Madeline. Madeline, were you around for Armistice Day? Were you, Rena? Tell us what Armistice Day is.
Yes, I was here, but I can't remember it right now. I knew what Veterans Day, and I know what all of my brothers was in the Second World War, and some of them were in the First World War. I was even alive then.
Thank you, Rena. Is there anybody here who's an expert on Armistice Day? Clyde, you were a school teacher. Armistice Day? Do you know? Can you tell us? Yeah, in a minute, but he's kind of young. Do you know, Clyde?
Yes, World War II was Armistice Day. Armistice Day was the 11th of November, and the World War I ended that day, I suppose. And we used to celebrate that in the schools, and it was a nice day to get off and whatever. And then we changed it to it's Veterans Day now.
It's Veterans Day now. 11/11. The 11th hour of November 11th. What year, Rex? 1918. So that is Veterans Day. Armistice Day, World War I. It was World War I? Rena, you weren't around then.
I sure was.
You were?
I was.
Wow. I wasn't, but my grandfather had fought in World War I. Gone over to France and got the mustard gas. He died when my father was just 8 years old, so I never met him. But I'm glad to learn that today. And at this point, to keep the peace, but also to make peace. If you have ever served in the armed forces for the United States of America, would you stand at this time if you have served or if you are currently serving? Stand. Veterans Day was November 11th, and a lot of people recognized it, but I want to recognize all you veterans with a big hand clap from the church. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Right after he's talking about disagreement, loyal yokefellow, could you help these two sisters come to an agreement, come to a reconciliation? Can you be part of the process of peace? And it's not just going to happen once. But you know what? Euodia and Syntyche, they once worked together with me by my side, but I know this about human relationships. If you will work through this thing, Euodia and Syntyche might become best of friends. They might truly have one another's back, but not if there's fight and flight. without reconciliation. So Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. I think this is a tool, just like that peacemaking scale and just like the peacemaking books and the videos we have. I think it's an opportunity for us to build each other up. I thank the Lord that Bell Road Baptist Church is known for music.